Welcome to On the Fence, the show that is about helping you decide whether or not to spend your hard-earned money on the biggest and possibly best releases in one lovely bite-sized mouthful. Nick.
Yo.
We are here to look at David Cage's Detroit Becoming Human.
Become Human.
Ah, so close. I was so close.
For the longest time, I thought it was Being Human, I'm not gonna lie.
Nick, what is Detroit Become Human?
So yeah, Detroit, as you mentioned, is the new game from David Cage's Quantic Dream studio. They obviously did Beyond Two Souls and they did Heavy Rain.
Yep.
You play as three protagonists. You play as Marcus, who is a kind of the leader of the android uprising and wants to kind of get androids on equal rights as humans. You play as Connor, who is a android who's been developed to help the police. He's like an android that helps with android-specific crimes, essentially. And you play as Kara, who is a housekeeper who escapes, who kind of becomes a deviant, which I'll get into later, and escapes her place, the place where she lives, with the daughter of a person, and they try to run away together.
So this is a David Cage game. You mentioned there that you bounce between a couple of characters, which is almost like a staple of his games nowadays. What does this game do to make itself different from its previous games?
Honestly, there's not that much different. Like, it's still very much you bounce from scene to scene, you do these decisions, and they'll have outcomes. Your characters can die, people will change their attitude towards you. So honestly, like, it is like if you've played one David Cage game, this plays like any other one. But they've kind of increased a lot of user experience stuff. Like, they have this new idea of the flowchart in the menus. So essentially, at the end of each scene, they will essentially just lay out essentially this massive flowchart of here's everything you did, like step by step. So when you got to this decision, you decide to say, oh, you didn't take this gun, and then the flowchart breaks off into its own separate web to say, all right, here's everything that happens because you didn't take the gun. And I think it's really good. Like, it'll really be good for people who are into that stuff and want to say, like, oh, I want to see all the different paths. It essentially just breaks down saying, all right, here's what you need to do differently to see these other paths.
So this is a story-driven game. You know, it's essentially kind of like an interactive movie. How is the story overall?
I think the story starts off a little, like, well, I say a little, very on the nose about it's kind of essentially replacing the, like, in a past time, replacing the idea of African Americans or blacks with androids. That's the kind of tone they're going for, where androids are seen as second-class people. They are just there to do your bidding. It's a thinly veiled allegory for racism and slavery. But then it kind of fleshes out with the idea of these deviants, who are essentially androids that have developed a bug in their system that lets them not have to obey a human. And as it goes through the game, you find out reasons like why people are becoming deviants, what's actually triggering the deviancy. And with, like, you see these plights and you see these characters, like, doing this stuff, and I actually feel like by the end of it, something I don't feel in a lot of David Cage games is I really don't give a shit about a lot of the characters. Like, the overall narrative I think is usually a lot better, but by the end of Detroit, I actually felt really, like, I was devastated when one of the characters died. Like, I felt like I wanted to immediately go back and try and do something differently to save that character. And I think they play it up really well with Kara constantly has a, like, child with her, and, like, I think it reminded me of The Walking Dead, where the whole purpose of your character is to preserve this child and make sure she is alive. And it brought back, like, the first Walking Dead, where you have Lee constantly protecting Clementine. And even the other characters, like Connor, is constantly struggling with the idea of, like, why is he doing certain things? Like, is he becoming a deviant? And it becomes this really big inner struggle between all of them. And the only thing that really, I think, lets down the story is they occasionally cheapen the idea of a character, like one of the main characters dying. Like, at the very start of the game, Connor dies, but he's immediately brought back. So I'm just like, oh, if he can die and get brought back, why can't anyone?
Yeah.
So, but admittedly, they do play into that towards the end of the game, and actually, like, that becomes a story device, but it just immediately cheapens the idea of one of your characters dying if, in the very next scene, they come back.
Nick, if I was on the fence about Detroit Become Human, what would you say to me?
As far as I'm concerned, this is the best of the Quantic Dream games. But at the end of the day, it is a Quantic Dream games. Like, you very much know what you're getting into, and if they're not your cup of tea, this isn't going to change your mind about it. But if you are, like, this is, I would say, the best one they've done. The story is very good towards the end, and the characters are the best ones they've done. Some of the gameplay stuff is also pretty cool. There's a lot more idea of puzzle solving in it, which they don't really do in the Quantic Dream games. But overall, like, yeah, it's... If you'll know you like this game before you even play it. It's that kind of game where it's so set, the Quantic Dream games are so set in their ways that they're not going to change.
That is Detroit Become Human. Currently available on PlayStation 4, and that is it. It is specific to PlayStation 4. Available for around £45 to £50. Thank you, Mr. Davis.
No problem.